they insisted we stop calling ourselves The Big Show. And Keith said, we don't know how many people are watching. We're kind of making fun of ourselves calling ourselves The Big Show. We're not. And then everybody took us seriously. Like, you guys really think you're The Big Show? We go, no.
Which was now replaced with, this is SportsCenter, and the next thing we knew, they've been running the same damn commercials for 35 years.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program. Dan and Keith were pushing boundaries during SportsCenter with comedic lines.
Well, we're so polite. Isn't it that?
Humble.
Yeah. Humble, always that.
Handsome.
Attempts to make each other laugh.
I always took a page from my heroes, Bob and Ray, the comedians, who said that ultimately they loved the audience, they loved being there, they loved entertaining, but the key goal for each of them was to try to crack the other guy up.
And an aggressive pursuit of making the show truly great. After nearly 5 brilliant years of sports highlights that resulted in both anchors' personal brands growing, it also took its toll on Keith Olbermann.
Was it a choice of Keith Olbermann to leave
Yes.
ESPN and SportsCenter?
Yes. I think he had gotten to the point where he had mastered it and for whatever reason decided he wanted to go elsewhere.
Keith would leave ESPN in 1997 in controversial fashion, and Dan would begin to co-host SportsCenter with Kenny Mayne and others over the next 9 years. SportsCenter became bigger than a single hour, but in my opinion, it never reached the heights of The Big Show
ever again.
Only a few short years after Keith's departure, Dan's career would also enter a new phase. In 1999, The Dan Patrick Show would become a much greater focus for Dan. Dan had maintained regular radio spots, but this would be his first crack at his own radio show. And it was an immediate success. Dan's popularity from ESPN television and his ability to interview guests while also entertaining was evident immediately. Originally, it was co-hosted by Rob Dibble. It would air from 1 to 4 on weekdays, and DP had a certain way of asking questions, engaging guests, and providing insight into sports that was on full display in this broadcasting arena. Sean Salisbury would also be a regular radio show participant, but he was never named an official co-host. Alongside the weekday radio show, Dan would also host NBA Nation in 2006 from March through the NBA Finals, which was an NBA pregame show that aired prior to ESPN's NBA games. The Dan Patrick Show would air on ESPN Radio until 2007, when after nearly 20 years on ESPN, Dan would decide to leave the network. 18 years in a job is a very long time, and it had been a long grind for Dan. From 1999 through 2007, Dan was a radio and television personality, and he desired to spend more time with his family.
I was selfish. I was doing second shift. I had 4 kids in, 7 years, there was 7 years with 4 kids. And my wife's doing all the work, and I'm here at SportsCenter.
Patrick's departure from ESPN was cordial, but it left many speculations as to what he would do next. Dan was asked to audition for the host of The Price is Right, but he declined.
What?
Sports writer Rick Riley believed Dan was, quote, making one of the top 5 biggest career mistakes in entertainment history, end quote. Some reports surfaced that Dan Patrick had been fired from ESPN, but this was not true. Patrick would go so far as to reiterate that there were no issues with himself and management, being quoted as saying, "I am leaving ESPN on August 17th to go out on my own and be a free agent," end quote. Now we move into what is my personal favorite Dan Patrick, post ESPN Dan Patrick. Dan would look to establish his own version of the Dan Patrick Show, and the DP Show, as it's affectionately referenced, was originally launched in Dan's attic under a syndication deal with Content Factory. The new show would feature Dan's producers, called the Danettes, and be distributed on premier radio networks. It aired from 9 to noon and as a live stream on Dan's website. Over the years, the show added different network partners for the live stream and grew in popularity as a television property. The show's added Danettes, who were inspired by Howard Stern's interactions with his co-hosts, added a familial element along with their typical behind-the-scenes duties. Paulie, Seaton, Fritzy McLovin, and now Marvin have provided Dan with a sounding board and endless content. The Dan Patrick Show has continued to be a staple within sports and a blueprint for many. Dan struck out on his own and inspired many others in sports to do the same. Dan Le Batard, Ryan Russillo, and others have cited Patrick as inspiration. One person who did not cite Dan as an inspiration was Colin Cowherd, who took shots at Dan's work ethic, saying this:
"This business I'm in, radio, full of guys who read the sports page, rip crap off. I'm here 3 hours a day." Okay. So is Romy. Dan Patrick doesn't work as hard as Rome, not even close. That's why I've always respected Romy. Puts the time in. Patrick needs 35 producers to fill a segment. Romy doesn't. Bayless doesn't. I don't.
Patrick would quickly respond by saying the following.
I guess Colin Cowherd, who was talking about Jim Rome and Skip Bayless's work ethic, and himself, that Colin throwing himself in there about how hard they work, and that I have 35 producers and somehow I'm lazy and don't have a good work ethic. I don't have 35 producers. I don't work at the worldwide leader. And the one thing that I do is I give credit to my producers on the air. It's not a one-man show. So all the people behind the scenes who help Colin do his show, they don't get any recognition. I choose to recognize the people who work on this show. As far as work ethic, I don't know how hard Colin Cowherd works, or Skip Bayless, or Jim Rome. I assume they work hard. Hope they do. Try a radio network. Try a simulcast. Maybe Colin for Sports Illustrated. Oh, that's right. Host the Olympics and Football Night in America. And do Sports Jeopardy as well, Colin. Try that. And then we can discuss work ethic. Until then, enjoy your show. Enjoy your life. Because it'll be over one day and nobody will care. Just like nobody's going to care about what I'm saying right now. I got to take a nap. I'm exhausted from working so hard on this show.
This has been The Unlikely Success.